Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. I'm Vice President of Communications for L'Oreal USA, as you just heard, and I hope, and I would think, that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with L'Oreal. It's in your business, you've got to be, but just in case you're not, we are the #1 beauty company in the world. We were founded over 100 years by a scientist, a gentleman who invented the first synthetic hair dye, and the rest is history. You probably also know some of our brands: Maybelline, L'Oreal Paris, of course, Lancôme, Kiehl's, just to name a few, along with some others like Clarisonic, It Cosmetics, thank you, and many more. We're headquartered in Paris, France, but we are the largest subsidiary for L'Oreal right here in New York, where we're headquartered. Now, I'm pleased to speak to you today about a subject near and dear to my heart, and that is disability. More specifically, I want to talk to you about breaking the silence around disability, because it's been a subject that too many of us have been silent about for far too long, and I can tell you that from personal experience. At L'Oreal, we're working to change that with our Breaking the Silence campaign. We have a global mission of ensuring that ours is an inclusive and a welcoming environment for people of all abilities, and that at least 2% of our employees are comprised of individuals with disabilities. Now, one might think that that's easy to accomplish with a company that has over 83,000 people around the world, and over 12,000 alone right here in the US. It's easy to say, but it's not easy to do, as I'm sure you probably know, because silence is the biggest disability of all. Now, to complicate things even further, L'Oreal is based on an acquisition model here in the U.S., so we're constantly acquiring new companies, and that means our headcount is always fluctuating. Because of that, we're constantly assimilating and educating new employees on disability and inclusion on an ongoing basis. And so when you get people up to speed with what our commitment is and what we've got going on, there's a whole new group coming in to work with. So let me ask you, how many of you know what the largest minority in the world is? Anybody? Disability, of course, that's right, people with disabilities. But it's not something a lot of us are comfortable talking about. Now, when you look at me, can you tell that I'm a person with a disability? Probably not. A little hair challenge some days, but that doesn't qualify. Actually, I have more than one. For more than 20 years, this is an example, I've had multiple sclerosis. When I was diagnosed back in 1998, my youngest daughter was just 6 months old. And the first thing, or among the first things my doctor told me when he diagnosed me was, don't tell anybody at work. And back then, nobody talked about that, and I didn't tell anybody at work. Now, I have remitting relapsing MS, which in my case, when I relapse, it causes me to lose large pieces of my vision. So when I relapse, I will look exactly the same to you as I do right now, but you all will look totally different to me. I am only able to see half of you. Isn't that weird? I always find myself looking around trying to go around, but I can only see half of your face. I'm only able to read parts of words, and I can't tell in a meeting who's talking because my vision is so compressed. I used to always, and this is when I worked for a different company, would get my steroid IVs to treat my MS behind closed doors in my office, and I would wear an ace bandage on my arm to wrap it up so that nobody knew what was going on. I told very few people that I had MS, and I lived my MS life behind closed doors. Now, I got to tell you, I'm far from alone in that. I am one of 67 million people in the U.S. who have a disability, and 75% of us are like me with invisible disabilities. Now, disability, as you may know, is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And frankly, it's the major life activities piece of that is so significant, because that's really comprehensive. The ADA defines major life activities as things like breathing and sitting or standing or comprehending or speaking. It can be almost anything, and that's why the conditions that are defined as disabilities are so broad. Everything from chronic migraines, anxiety, diabetes, PTSD, cancer, speech impediments, much, much more. Now, the law prevents my employer from asking me if I have a disability, and so disclosure is entirely up to me. So if I don't see a benefit to disclose, and if I'm fearful of the implications of disclosing, why would I? When a disability is invisible, it's possible to go many years without anybody even knowing that you have any kind of condition that could possibly impact you at home or at work. And certainly let you go for years like I did without saying anything or asking for help. Now, there are some ways that that's a blessing when you have an invisible disability. Nobody can tell by looking at you that there's anything going on. And that's kind of a comfort, knowing that you're just like everybody else. But at other times, it can be a curse, because when you tell someone you're not doing well or you're not feeling well, there's a little part of you that wonders if they really believe what you're saying, because it's hard for others to understand what they can't see. So how do we go about breaking the silence around disability? Well, first, I think we need to understand why people are afraid to disclose. And you can see on the slide there some of the reasons people are reluctant to talk about it. Fear of being looked at differently and the stigma around that is certainly one of them. Fear of people's perceptions. Can she do her job? Fear of discrimination, using a person's disability consciously or sometimes unconsciously to discriminate against them. Often not offering promotions, for example, or not offering stretch assignments because of the perception that maybe they're just not up to it, maybe it's too much for them, or presuming that they might not want to travel because they have a disability. And denial, that's a big one. No one wants to feel different. Well, I got to tell you, things changed for me when I was diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago. And I really didn't have the option then of hiding my disability any longer. That really was my epiphany, and that changed everything for me. I knew I'd be going for treatments and that I'd be missing work and possibly more than one day a month or one day a week. I was doing a clinical trial in addition to the treatment for cancer, so there would be 2 days a month that I would be out of the office totally. And I knew I would probably look different and I'd certainly feel different. Ironically enough, I had just moved to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at L'Oreal. I had been at L'Oreal for 10 years prior to that point, heading up the corporate communications department. And when I moved to diversity and inclusion, my boss asked me if I would head up the disability think tank. And so I decided at that moment that if I was going to do that, I had to walk the talk. And I would disclose my disabilities, but I'd do more than disclose it than by just checking our disability form. So I wrote a blog about my experience with MS and how it was to hide it all those years. I said that along with my recent diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I had decided to let everybody know what I was dealing with because I was tired of hiding it, and that is so true, and I was tired of keeping my secret. While I didn't want my disability to define me, I had finally come to realize, after all of that, the person letting it define me was me. And so I decided at that point that I was going to change things, and I was going to take back control of my life and how I presented myself to the world. And so on that day, I got to tell you, when I was hooked up to the IV at Memorial Sloan Kettering, thank you. That was when my blog was posted on our corporate intranet, and I was sitting there. I knew it was going to happen that morning, and I got to tell you, the response, it was amazing. My phone started lighting up with emails from all over the company, people I knew, people I didn't know, people sharing their stories with me and telling me how nice it was to know that they weren't alone. And that's when I learned the value of disclosure, and that talking about it openly was the right thing to do, because it does make a difference. And I was surprised, really, and I still am to this day, at how empowering and freeing it was. I never realized how much I was carrying around with me until I actually came out and talked about it. That was in 2013. And we now have a disability and inclusion strategy at L'Oreal, as you can see right there. And we talk about it a lot. We want our employees to know about it and to feel comfortable knowing that L'Oreal is an accommodating and inclusive place for people with disabilities. We built on what I began doing that day at Sloan engaging employees all year round and breaking the silence on disability, because the more we talk about it, the less daunting it becomes. We set out to reach our mission to ensure that at least 2% of our workforce was comprised of people with disabilities and that they would feel comfortable disclosing and receiving accommodations if needed. We work every day to be a leader in creating an inclusive workplace for people of all abilities. And we do that by leveraging the Diverse Ability Think Tank, as well as through education and leadership. In 2013, In 2013, our disclosure rate was about 4%. I'm sorry, 0.4%. I wish it was 4%. We hadn't said or done much around disability up until then, so the first thing we did was form a Diverse Ability Think Tank, which is our employee resource group. It was initially a small group of people with disabilities or allies of people with disabilities. We have an executive sponsor, David Greenberg, who is our president of our professional products division, and he's also on the strategic committee at L'Oreal. And he serves as our ally for the Disability Think Tank. He also informs our management about what we're doing and the initiatives that we have underway, and he's a real strong supporter. The think tank started out in one location here in New York and has since expanded to 11 states and 11 facilities. Now, the beauty, no pun intended, of the think tank is that our members are from all divisions and functions at the company. And it's turned into a wonderful community of people who have a passion for helping and supporting others, who serve as resources to other employees, and who are committed to challenging the way people perceive individuals with disabilities and influencing others to do the same. Several of our think tank members, are from our operations facilities. There we go. We have manufacturing plants and distribution centers all over the country. And when one of those facilities reached out to us about the possibility of hiring individuals with disabilities at one of their distribution centers in New Jersey, we jumped at the opportunity. Take a look. That's one of my favorite programs, the L'Oreal. We just did it last year. Thank you. And we are spreading that effort more broadly right now because we are going to be launching a very similar program next in North Little Rock, Arkansas, I think later this month, so it's very exciting. Now, the think tank also shares personal stories of people's experiences with disability on emails, on intranet blogs. We hold lunch and learns. We do more things like that. But storytelling, I have to tell you, probably makes the biggest impact of anything that we do. And the think tank, I have to say, has been a tremendous resource in that. They're sharing their personal stories with other employees, and that motivates action and it encourages others to consider disclosure. We've also hosted panel discussions with employees talking about living and working with disabilities and highlighting the benefits of disclosure. We use every opportunity to educate our employees on disabilities, whether it's sharing facts and figures, resources, information, breaking myths, and generally beating the drum all the time about disclosure. We make a concerted effort to reinforce the company's commitment to people with disabilities throughout the organization, from the very top, from our CEO, Frederick Rose, who is a big advocate for people with disabilities, to our others in our management and beyond who share their own personal stories of being touched by disability. And I've got to tell you, that connects with employees like nothing else. Disability, frankly, doesn't discriminate. It really levels the playing field for anybody who's touched by it. Now, we talk about it through the year. For example, every October for National Disability Employment Awareness Month, you'll find posters like this in all L'Oreal locations. We download them for free from the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, have them printed and sent to all locations. In addition, we hold disability awareness training workshops, we host departmental meetings, and we continue to share stories. We also reinforce that disclosure process through the screensaver that you see there. That's on all L'Oreal computers through the month of October. It's their landing page. It focuses on the benefits of breaking the silence and the stigmas associated with that. It also drives employees to our disclosure form on PRISM on our intranet. But we don't stop there. We also meet with all business leaders of each of our divisions and functions throughout the year, and we share their metrics with them related to diversity because we're all held accountable to meeting our goals. So in addition to tracking the number of men and women and veterans and people of color at L'Oreal, we also track how each division and each function is doing in terms of meeting our goal for people with disabilities. We help them to define ways to move the needle in all dimensions of diversity, specifically disability in that point, and work to ensure that their employees know that they are part of the organization and that disability is a priority for all of us at L'Oreal. We also work to ensure that we're staying updated on policies and procedures for disability. We benchmark ourselves against other companies where possible and other organizations, and we work with partners like the National Organization on Disability and Disability In to gauge how we're doing and to identify areas for improvement. We also participate in conferences, whether it's hosting people at our offices like we're doing with the National Organization on Disability next month, whether it's participating in webinars or speaking at conferences and meetings like this one. We've also been successful in partnering with other departments, such as our sourcing department at L'Oreal, where we've been able to leverage relationships and encourage vendors to employ individuals with disabilities in their organizations. Our brands, I have to say, have really stepped up to the plate here as well, and they've taken the opportunity to work with organizations like PCDI that you saw in the video, and like Employment Horizons, which are organizations that provide jobs to people with disabilities by conducting fulfillment work in their offices. So by handling mailings, compiling gift bags, assembling gifts with purchase, whatever it is, our brands have been able to provide help to these organizations and provide them with work for their employees with disabilities, giving them a sense of purpose as well as an opportunity to earn a paycheck. It's an easy way to make a difference. So what's the impact of all this? More than you might think, and certainly more than I initially thought. We've developed a deeper relationship and engagement with the disability community, both internally and externally. Last year, we were named a Best Place to Work for Disability Inclusion by the Disability Equality Index and a leading disability employer by the National Organization on Disability. We've also increased the number of solidarity sourcing beneficiaries whose employees with disability are receiving indirect employment through L'Oreal. Through insights provided by the Diversibility think tank, we've also enhanced some of our benefits, like our hearing aid coverage. Never used to be covered, and one of our think tank members has a hearing disability and was putting off getting a hearing aid because we hadn't covered it. Now it's covered at L'Oreal, so you really can make a difference in that kind of way as well. And we continue to increase our employee engagement. You saw the slide where the think tank membership has grown 200% over the past 17 months, so people really are willing to roll up their sleeves and help. I have to say, too, talking about disability 365 days of the year, keeping it visible and top of mind does make a difference. We've seen that employees feel more comfortable disclosing disabilities at L'Oreal because the more we talk about it, the easier it is for them. Think back to our disclosure number in 2013 at 0.4%. We had just begun to crack the silence around disability then. Now, although we haven't shattered it by any means, we're well on our way. And by the end of 2018, our disclosure numbers had increased to 2.6% and continue to grow. You know, I remember former First Lady Michelle Obama once said that we should all be the change that we want to see. You can't just wish it to happen. And while laws and legislation certainly help help move things forward, you can't change the years of silence, stigmas, and discrimination by signing the Americans with Disabilities Act and expecting everything to change at once. It's hard work and it's perseverance. It's communicating on disability all year round, and it's walking the talk. Employees who see other employees talking openly about disability will feel more comfortable disclosing, and we've seen that happen at L'Oreal. Employees seeing companies make changes to accommodate others with disability will be more likely to ask for accommodations if they need them. And employees will value working for a company that cares about people of all abilities. We've seen our employees, for example, in Clark and in Cranberry, where we've done videos on accommodations that we've made for people with disability, has just given them a tremendous source of pride. Whether they have disabilities or not, it's just so meaningful to them to see that the company actually takes action on things like that. So we want to be that change at L'Oreal, and we work every day to break the silence on disability. I hope all of you will join that effort for your organizations, because silence really isn't golden, and breaking it can really open up a world of possibilities for you and your employees. I can promise you, you won't regret it. Thank you.
So first of all, Rebecca, thank you for such an inspirational story and for being a powerful example of what can be done in terms of breaking that silence around disabilities. I'm sure that all of us in this room can reflect about some of these ideas and come up with new ideas about how we can even optimize that in our own workplaces. So thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions. How did you determine that 2% was the right target for disclosure?
That was actually a number that our chairman and global CEO, Jean-Paul Agon, had established. And it was because we needed to start somewhere. And there are many countries, like the U.S., where you are not allowed to ask employees to disclose their disability. There are many countries where it's very taboo for many reasons to disclose. And so 2% was a good starting point for us and a place from where to grow.
We are unaware of anyone with a disability at our company. How do we get started to encourage the first brave person to come forward?
I think a lot of it is sharing stories. So it's certainly, recognizing the months that acknowledge disability. And there are so many months of the year where you can educate employees about disability, whether it's October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, December is International Day of Persons with Disabilities, there's Mental Health Month, there's Autism Awareness Month. So there are a lot of opportunities to raise the visibility of disabilities among your employees. And then certainly having your CEO lead the way by talking about the company's commitment to disabilities. It has to really start at the top, and you have to be able to know that your company stands for this for anybody to be comfortable speaking up. I had a person on the think tank who was leaving to go to another company, and he said, what should I do? Should I disclose when I get to the company? And I said, it's got to be your decision, but I will tell you that all those years I didn't do it. And frankly, it wasn't until I knew that L'Oreal was very focused on making sure that the workplace was accommodating and welcoming for people with disabilities that I felt safe to do that. And so it really is an individual decision. But I think raising awareness in all those ways is a great place to start.
Yeah, and I would probably say that it probably makes sense to try more than one effort, particularly for something that you're starting anew, because that will be the way to get more people involved. So think about it not just from a one-time move, but think about it in multiple steps.
Yep.
Some people say differently abled versus disabled. How should we think of this?
Yeah. There's been a lot of discussion, and I've gone to a lot of conferences, disability conferences, where that comes up. And I think it's differently abled is just a better way of saying it, because it puts the focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. The DIS is so negative. And so rather than focusing on what's wrong with someone or what they can't do, we'd rather focus on their abilities. Because, the one thing about people with disabilities is that they can be very innovative about getting things done. And so we don't want to shortchange anyone on that. And so I think differently abled is a much kinder and more inclusive term.
So as an alumnus of L'Oreal, I'm proud. So thank you very much.
Thank
This
you.
is really, really good. Thank you very much.